All right, so that concludes then that IEC briefing. Of course, this is the first IEC briefing that is happening right here at the Results Operating Centre in Midrand ahead of those special votes taking place tomorrow and Tuesday. The IEC confirming there that they are ready to process 1.7 million registered voters for the special voting. Of course, the IEC also just, dismissing allegations of vote rigging ahead of the first day of the special voting tomorrow, following the video circulating on the social media depicting MKA members, alleging that irregularities occurred with the delivery of voting material in the Durban area. I am still in conversation with political analyst Dr. Sithembile Mbete, who joins me now just to unpack, some of the key issues that were raised in this briefing. I mean, the IEC, just ahead of this election, has had to deal with a number of issues, Dr. Mbete. Just how concerned then should we be about some of these things that we are hearing now, outside, of course, of the court cases that they have had to deal with?
Look, election management is incredibly complex, and the IEC is one of the best election management bodies in the world. But besides that, many of the things, if you look at the allegations from last night that are coming up, there's an expectation, it seems, that, that ballot boxes, fly directly into a particular building and are never touched by humans. They're never piled up. So our expectations around what normal logistical arrangements would look like are in some ways quite unrealistic. But I think it does point to a general atmosphere of mistrust of the political system in general, and a mistrust of particular political actors more specifically. But I think that there does need to be good faith engagement with the IEC, because what we also have, and what the court cases I think reflect, is that there are many processes to lay grievances, to try and have the IEC held to account for the decisions that it makes, whether that is through the electoral court or through other mechanisms that we have as a country and that are provided for in the Electoral Act. And so the IEC doesn't have carte blanche to act with impunity, and there are ways for both political parties and citizens to hold the IEC accountable, but that also is based on the idea that we are engaging with the electoral process in good faith. And not because we are trying to sabotage the system in any way.
And I mean, just talking about these particular elections, they are important, notwithstanding the fact that we are, commemorating our 30 years of democracy. Just earlier on, we were talking about the importance of observers during this election. We are seeing a record number of observers, in the 2024 elections. What does that speak to? And I mean, how important is it then to have, such interest in this country?
Look, this year we've got over 160 organizations that are here internationally, and also some local organizations that will be overseeing, I think, around 5,000 observers. In 2019, it was 76 or 75 observer missions, both domestic and international. So it is much more. There are many more observers that are going to be in these elections. And I think it's partly because it's 30 years of democracy, and there's a great deal of interest in, how South Africa has fared, and in being here. This is also globally the year of democracy. Half of the world's population is voting this year. I think it's about 84 countries that are going to be having national level elections. So there's a great deal of interest in elections this year. I think that's also then an important factor to keep in mind in terms of what we were speaking about the concerns about the IEC's management of the elections, is that what observers are here to do is to observe the processes. There will be observers that will be observing the special votes taking place tomorrow and Tuesday, that will be observing today the transportation of the different ballots and voting ballot papers and ballot boxes to the intended locations. And so there are so many eyes on this election, and I think that should give ordinary voters comfort that it's not just the IEC doing things in the dark on its own, but that there are going to be many eyes.
Yeah, and I mean, it's early days. We will continue to speak to the IEC as it also manages, these processes. We know, of course, that they are still to transport and count the votes that we saw overseas, that were made over the weekend. And of course, for the next 2 days, those ballot papers will also be secured and transported in a centralized location. But let's go back to the heart of the matter this weekend. I mean, we are seeing literally political parties ramping up the ante in terms of their campaigning, making those promises, affirming their policies. What are your takeouts in as far as, let's say, the top 3 political parties over the past couple of months, as they've had to really put their necks out in terms of, wooing the electorate, to vote for them?
Look, I think that what we've seen for the top 3 parties, for the ANC, for the Democratic Alliance, for the Economic Freedom Fighters, has been the sense that they can't take for granted the vote in the way that they perhaps have become comfortable in doing so, this particularly for the top 2 parties, for the ANC and for the DA. So we've seen them on the one hand trying to, secure their base, secure their traditional supporters, but also on the other trying to woo newer voters, first-time voters, trying to woo voters from other political parties, or voters that had become disgruntled with the system and had checked out, trying to get those people back in to be able to vote for them and trying to show their governance record. This is particularly for the ANC and the DA, and to say, don't you want to be governed by us or to continue being governed by us after the 29th of May? And I think this weekend's rallies were very much about trying to show their broad support base, to show that they have secured their base of voters and that there won't be the kind of change that we were talking about earlier after Wednesday.
Let's look at then some of the dynamics, within this particular election. I mean, all eyes are really on the governing party, the ANC. They've been touted, of course, to be projecting anything between 40% at one point, it was said, to about 45% in this particular election. That's a plummet in terms of numbers from what we saw in 2019. Of course, already we know there was a gradual decrease of, support for the ANC. But what does it say outside of the ANC? What does it say for opposition parties who are also being projected as not growing that much? Yes. One would assume that if the ANC is going to be plummeting in numbers, the opposition parties would be rising, but we're seeing the opposite. We're
not seeing as huge an increase as one would expect from the opposition parties, and I think it points to the fact that there hasn't been a single opposition party that has really come up strongly to be an equal opposition, but counter to the ANC. I think that what we've seen also in the last few months is that the ANC remains the only political party that has a presence and that can organize in all 4,400 and something wards that we have in South Africa. We've seen, the ANC doing door-to-door, the funny pictures of people helping with people's washing and, all the gimmicky campaigning stuff. But I think that what that points to is that the ANC is still the only party that can have a presence all over the country. And South Africa is a massive country geographically. And, other opposition parties don't have the same kind of geographical reach and haven't been able, I think, to reach as many people as the ANC is able to organize to do so. And the second thing is that we haven't seen opposition parties really giving an alternative vision of what South Africa can be to what the ANC sells, right? So opposition parties have really focused on what the ANC is very bad at. On corruption, on the poor governance and the maladministration that we see across the country. So they have really focused on the ANC's weaknesses. But I don't think that they have been as good in selling the vision of, well, what are you going to bring do you think it's a missed opportunity, particularly for the main opposition, the DA? Because, they are, of course, touting the Rescue South Africa tagline.
But they're also honing in on protecting the Western Cape. It's almost as if their vision is centered around this one province that they've been leading for quite some time, and not opening themselves up to the rest of the country.
Indeed, it doesn't seem that the DA is very comfortable of being a national, with being a national government. And we've heard far less from the DA about what its agenda is for the country nationally. Absolutely. And far more about what its agenda is for the Western Cape, and then this agenda of keeping the Western Cape the same as it has been in the last 15 years. And so in terms of who that'll then land with, I think that's a really great message for the DA's base. And I think, whether it's the advert, the TV ad, the very controversial one that they had, or whether it is the messaging against the smaller parties, the Rise Mzansi, the PA, the Patriotic Alliance, and others in the Western Cape, I think that is all messaging that plays very well to the DA's core support base. But it doesn't seem as though there's been a lot done to expand that support base and to speak to people that otherwise would not be voting for the DA. And the Afrobarometer released their pre-elections research last week, and it showed that of the people, and they survey thousands, tens of thousands of people every year, and about 32% of the people that they spoke to said that they were undecided. So there's a huge number of undecided voters going into the election on Wednesday, people who are registered to vote, who can vote on Wednesday, but who don't know who they're going to vote for.
I mean, that is a concern, I would imagine, because in 2019 we saw how those that didn't know who to vote for actually abstained from voting. They stayed away, and that then becomes a problem. I mean, we've got 27 million people that have registered to vote for this election. Are we likely then to see people completely staying out of this? And what does that then say about particularly the emerging parties coming in? I mean, one would imagine that gives, South Africans a basket of, political parties to choose from. But it seems at this point, and from my vantage point, to be scaring them.
Well, what we saw in 2016, interestingly enough, so that was a local government election, and local elections and national elections are not the same, but the local government elections in 2016, where it seemed that things were going to be really competitive, and we saw that in 2016 had the highest level of turnout in a local government election ever, because people felt as though that their vote could actually make real change in the places where they lived, and so we saw a huge turnout because there was this increased competition. So what we don't know this year is whether we're going to see the same phenomenon where people are going to respond to the increased uncertainty to say, well, okay, my vote could actually do something here. And when they do that, who are they actually going to then turn out and vote for? We don't know that. Or whether, as you say, people are going to be overwhelmed by all the changes and then choose to stay at home. I think that one of the big factors here is also going to be around how confident people feel about being able to navigate the new ballot structure, that we've got 3 ballot papers this time instead of 2. It's not as big a change, I think, as people are scared of. Instead, you'll have 2 ballot papers for the National Assembly, 1 for the provincial legislature, as we've always had. And the big thing to remember is 1 X per ballot. That's all you need to know.
And that is important. But let's stay with that, because I think you have a point there in as far as people actually thinking that they are going to be confused, and the expectation here is that you don't have to necessarily mark an X to one party across, the 3 ballot papers. Let's say then you are a South African who really wants, who you want to vote for nationally particularly, but you also have interest in these independent candidates. We've got 11 independents that are now vying for, the regional spaces. What should they do? What should they look out for?
Well, I think firstly, just find out about those independent candidates, right? Each province, I think, firstly, something to remember is that we don't have an independent candidate in each of the provinces. I think it's about 5 provinces that are going to have independent candidates competing there in the regional ballot, and I think about 4 for the provincial legislatures. So that's the first thing, is that this isn't going to be a problem for everyone. The second thing, so find out who it is. In the provinces that do have independent independent candidates running, have between 1 and 3 independents running. And so find out who those people are. If you like their approach, if you like their agenda, then yes, vote for them on the regional ballot. Or if you see somebody who you think is going to speak very much to the issues that you're interested in your province. We heard the people that were interviewed earlier in the Free State about, water and sanitation, about the roads, saying that they want to have access to housing. If there's an independent speaking to those issues, then yes, go ahead and vote for that person.
Then it becomes a numbers game. Some people saying, I want to vote for an independent, but what weight are they going to bring in the National Assembly as an example? Is it really about those numbers? We've seen some legislation being passed just by parties that had one representative, for instance, in the National Assembly. Yes,
I always say to people that, the reason why we even had that investigation about Phala in the National Assembly is because that issue was brought to the Speaker by the ATM, which is a party with 1 or 2 members of parliament in the last so even small parties, remember that members of parliament or members of provincial legislatures as individuals have the same powers as each other.
Absolutely.
And so there's actually a great deal of influence that a single person can exert over a legislature. The last thing I want to say though around the will my vote count is that yes, it will. The votes, after all of the votes are cast, then the IEC needs to turn all of the votes and say, well, how many seats in the National Assembly will each party get, or can each party get? And the way that they calculate that is based on a quota formula that says how many votes do you need to get a seat in Parliament. In the last election in 2019, you needed 43,000 votes in order to get a seat in Parliament. And that calculation is done on voter turnout. How many people, turned out to vote, how many votes were cast. So even if the party that you vote for or the independent candidate that you vote for doesn't secure a seat in the National Assembly or in the provincial legislature, the fact that you voted is important in determining how much all of the other parties are going to get. Are they going to get more or are they going to get less? And what we know is that when voter turnout is high, so when many people turn out to vote, it's a lot harder. You need more votes in order to get a seat. And so the situation becomes a lot more challenging for the big parties, actually, for the established parties, because those are the parties that can get their base out to vote. But if there's newer voters that come out that aren't going to vote for those parties, then, it's a bit more difficult. And so the point is, get to the voting station and trust that the IEC officials that are there will be able to explain to you exactly how the ballots work. So if you're feeling a bit uncertain, don't worry, just go to the voting station and it'll be explained to you.
Perfect.
There.
I think the message is now clear. Thank you so much, Dr. Mbete, for your time. But of course, there are still a couple of days to the election, so we'll have you back in studio, just unpacking all the dynamics for us. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course, political parties are holding their final campaigns, rallies this weekend, and we've seen them. We've seen our reporters out and about across various provinces as these political parties, do their final best to woo voters ahead of the crucial elections. Well, tomorrow and as well as Tuesday are your special votes that will be taking place. We heard from the IEC just a few moments ago that they are expecting to facilitate about 1.7 million South Africans who have indicated that they will be voting in those special votes.